Marcus Cole was not a hero, and he had never pretended to be one either. He was just a mechanic who lived in a small town called Dust Hollow with his 7-year-old daughter Lily. He fixed trucks and tractors and anything else people brought to his little salvage shop at the edge of town. His wife Elena had died 3 years ago in an accident, and since then it had just been him and Lily against the world. He kept things simple because simple was all he could handle. It was a Tuesday night when the sky broke open. He was driving home late from the shop with the radio playing some old country song when a streak of fire tore across the darkness above him. It was not a shooting star. It was too big and too bright and too angry for that. The thing screamed across the heavens like a wounded animal, and then it slammed into the ridge behind his property with a sound that shook the ground under his truck tires. Marcus pulled over and sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He could see smoke rising over the tree line and an orange glow pulsing against the clouds. Every reasonable part of his brain told him to drive home and call someone. But then he thought about how someone might be hurt up there and how the nearest emergency response was 40 minutes away on a good day. He turned the truck toward the ridge. What he found when he got there made him stop breathing for a second. It was a ship, not the little ones that sometimes pass through Earth's sky on their way to somewhere important. This thing was enormous. Half of it was buried in scorched earth, and the other half rose up like a wounded metal mountain against the stars. Its hull was cracked in several places, and some kind of glowing blue fluid was leaking out of the wounds and pooling in the dirt. Emergency lights blinked weakly along the exterior, like a heartbeat that was fading fast. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and climbed toward what looked like a hatch that had been forced open from the inside. The metal was still hot, and he burned his fingers twice before he found a way to grip it properly. Inside the ship, the air smelled like ozone and something sweet he could not identify. Red emergency lighting painted everything in shades of blood. He found her in a corridor about 30 feet from the hatch. She was massive, nearly 9 feet tall, even slumped against the wall the way she was. Her skin was silver blue, and it seemed to catch the emergency lighting and hold it like moonlight trapped underwater. She had 4 arms, and 2 of them were wrapped around a wound on her side, where dark fluid was seeping through cracked armor. Her head was crowned with long tendrils that looked like hair, but glowed faintly with bioluminescent light. They were dim now, and flickering like candles about to go out. She was unconscious, and she was alone. No crew, no guards, no one. Marcus knelt beside her and looked at the wound. He had no idea what alien biology looked like on the inside. But blood was blood, and a wound was a wound. He pulled out the basic first aid kit he always kept in his truck, and he cleaned the gash as best he could. The antiseptic made her flinch in her sleep, but the bleeding slowed. He could not move her because she probably weighed as much as his truck, so he covered her with a tarp and rigged a support for her head using a rolled-up jacket. Then he drove home. He got Lily settled with Mrs. Patterson next door and told her he had an emergency at the shop. Then he loaded his truck bed with everything he could think of: welding equipment, portable generators, extension cords, a cooler full of food and water, extra blankets, and about 40 pounds of assorted tools. He drove back to the ridge and he got to work. He did not know this ship. He did not know this technology. But a machine was a machine, and right now, this machine was dying. He found the emergency power relay first, because every vehicle ever built has one, and it is always somewhere near the core systems. The alien version was more complex than anything he had ever seen, but the principle was the same. Power needed to flow from one place to another, and something in between was broken. He spliced in a bypass using parts from his own generators and some creative rewiring that would have made his old engineering teacher either proud or horrified. 2 hours later, the emergency lights stopped flickering, and the ship hummed with something that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. That was when she woke up. Marcus was elbow-deep in a wall panel when he heard movement behind him. He turned and found himself looking up at the alien woman, who was now sitting upright and staring at him with eyes that were entirely silver, with no pupils or irises. Just endless reflective silver, like two small moons set into her face. She said something in a language that sounded like music played backwards. And then, there was a click from a small device on her wrist, and suddenly her words rearranged themselves into something he could understand. "Who are you, and why are you inside my ship?" she said, and her voice was deep and resonant like a cathedral bell struck softly. "Name is Marcus," he said, and he wiped his hands on his jeans. "Your ship crashed on my property, and you were bleeding pretty bad, so I patched you up, and now I'm trying to get your power system stable before the whole thing shuts down for good. Here." Marcus nodded like this was a perfectly normal thing to hear on a Tuesday night. He reached into his cooler and pulled out a thermos. He poured a cup of coffee and held it up to her. She took it carefully in one of her 4 hands, and the cup looked like a toy in her grip. "Well, Calthera," Marcus said, and he turned back to the open panel. "Let us see what we are working with." She sipped the coffee and made a face that suggested she was not sure if she loved it or hated it. Then she watched this small, fragile human creature crawl back into the guts of her ship with nothing but hand tools and a flashlight, and she felt something she could not quite name. Her ship was built by the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy. The finest engineers in 12,000 star systems had designed every component. A full repair crew would consist of 40 specialists with decades of training, and a Class 7 fabrication bay worth more than most planets. This human was using a welding torch and something called duct tape. And somehow, against every law of probability and reason that she knew of, it was working. Calthera sat in the dim corridor of her broken ship, on a planet that her people considered barely worth mapping, and she drank the strange, bitter drink the human had given her, and she wondered what exactly she had crashed into. 2 weeks passed, and Marcus fell into a rhythm that would have seemed insane to anyone watching from the outside. Every morning, he would drop Lily at school and drive to the shop, where he would handle whatever work had come in. Then every afternoon, he would load up his truck and drive to the ridge, where a 9-foot-tall alien woman was waiting for him, beside a broken starship that was worth more than the entire planet Earth. He treated the whole thing like it was just another job. Calthera watched him work, and at first she tried to help by explaining things. She would point to a component and describe its function using terms that translated into English as things like quantum fold energy matrix and subspace harmonic compensator. And Marcus would nod politely and then ignore most of what she said and just start taking things apart. It drove her crazy at first. She was used to engineers who studied for decades before being allowed to touch Vortian technology. Human did not study anything. He just looked at a system and turned it over in his hands, and somehow understood what it was supposed to do by the shape of it, and the way the pieces connected. He could not explain the science behind any of it, but he did not need to. He understood machines the way some people understood music, not through theory, but through feel. On the 4th day, he fixed the atmospheric recycling system by replacing a cracked crystal resonator with a piece of quartz he found in a creek bed near his property. Calthera told him that was impossible, because the resonator required a specific molecular alignment that could only be achieved in a zero-gravity fabrication chamber. Marcus shrugged and said, "Well, it is working, so maybe the creek bed figured it out." She stopped trying to explain things after that. On the 8th day, Marcus brought Lily. He had run out of neighbors willing to watch her on short notice, and he could not keep lying about where he went every afternoon. So he put her in the truck and drove to the ridge and told her that Daddy had a friend who needed help with her car. Lily took one look at Calthera and her silver-blue skin and her 4 arms and her glowing tendrils and said, "You are really tall. Do you like peanut butter sandwiches? Because I brought extra." Calthera, who had faced down admirals and ambassadors and war councils without flinching, found herself completely disarmed by a 7-year-old girl holding out a sandwich in a plastic bag. She took it carefully and ate it and told Lily it was the best thing she had ever tasted. This was not entirely a lie. It was certainly the strangest thing she had ever tasted. After that, Lily came every day. She would sit on a crate near the ship and draw pictures while Marcus worked. She drew the ship, and she drew Calthera, and she drew her father covered in grease, holding a wrench. She drew stars and moons and flowers all mixed together like they all belonged in the same garden. She would show each drawing to Calthera, who studied them with the same intensity she gave to military intelligence briefings. One evening, Lily asked if she could braid Calthera's tendrils. Calthera hesitated because her tendrils were considered sacred among her people, and no one had ever touched them casually before. But Lily was already climbing onto the crate beside her and reaching up with small, careful fingers, so Calthera leaned down and let her. Lily's hands were gentle and clumsy, and she hummed a song while she worked, and the tendrils glowed brighter under her touch. Calthera sat very still, and something inside her chest that had been locked shut for a very long time began to open. She had grown up in palaces surrounded by thousands of servants and advisors and guards, and not one of them had ever touched her like this. Not with simple, uncomplicated kindness that wanted nothing in return. Marcus cooked dinner at the ship that night. He had brought a portable stove, and he made chili in a big pot, and served it in metal bowls. Calthera needed both hands to hold the tiny human bowl, and she ate carefully. Then her silver eyes went wide. "What is this?" she said. "Chili," Marcus said. "Old family recipe." "I need more of this," she said, with an intensity that made Marcus laugh for the first time in a long while. They sat outside the ship under the stars and ate chili together, and Marcus told her about Elena. He did not make it dramatic or sad. He just said that she had been kind and funny, and that she made everything better just by being in the room. He said Lily had her eyes and her laugh, and that every time he heard it, he felt like Elena was still nearby. He said that fixing things was how he kept moving forward, because if his hands were busy, his mind could not wander to places that hurt. Calthera listened and said nothing for a while. Then she told him that she came from a powerful family, and that someone in that family had betrayed her. She said there were people who wanted her dead, and that she had been running when her ship was sabotaged. She kept the details vague, and Marcus did not push. He just nodded and said, "Well, you are safe here for now, so let us focus on getting you flying again." On the 15th day, they hit the big problem. The main hull breach required a material to seal it that did not exist on Earth. Calthera explained that the hull was made from a compound that her civilization manufactured using particle accelerators the size of small moons. There was no substitute. There was no alternative. Without it, the ship could not survive atmospheric exit. Marcus listened. He asked a few questions about the material properties. He wrote some numbers on the back of a napkin, then he disappeared. He was gone for 2 days. Calthera told herself she was not worried, but she kept looking toward the road. Lily stayed with Mrs. Patterson. Called Calthera on a walkie-talkie Marcus had left behind. She told Calthera about her school day, and about a boy named Tommy who had put a frog in the teacher's desk, and about how she missed her dad, but he always came back because that was what her dad did. On the 3rd morning, Marcus returned. He was exhausted, and his hands were bandaged, and he smelled like smoke and hot metal. In the back of his truck was a sheet of dark gray material that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. He had built a makeshift forge behind his shop, and spent 2 days experimenting with metal alloys. He had combined terrestrial metals in ways that no metallurgist would have approved of, using heat levels that should have been impossible with his equipment. He had burned through 3 sets of gloves, and nearly set his shop on fire twice. He handed the sheet to Calthera and said, "Try this." She scanned it with her wrist device, and then she went very quiet. She scanned it again, then a third time. The alloy's tensile strength exceeded the original hull material by 11%. She looked at Marcus, who was leaning against his truck with his bandaged hands in his pockets, looking like he might fall asleep standing up. She opened her mouth to say something and then closed it again, because there were no words in any of the 400 languages she spoke that could adequately express what she was feeling. "Took a few tries," Marcus said. That night, after Marcus went home and Lily was asleep, Calthera sat alone in her ship and pulled up the communications array that Marcus had repaired on day 6. A message was waiting, encrypted on a frequency that only Vortian royalty could access. She opened it, and her blood went cold. It was from her cousin, Prince Virak Vortian, the one who had killed her guards, the one who had sabotaged her ship, the one who wanted her dead so he could take everything that was rightfully hers. "Short, I know you survived, little cousin. I am coming to collect what is mine." Calthera closed the message and stared at the wall and thought about Marcus and Lily and peanut butter sandwiches and chili and the way this small broken planet had shown her more warmth in 2 weeks than the entire galaxy had given her in centuries. Calthera decided to leave in the middle of the night, because that was what a princess did when the people around her were in danger. She packed nothing, because she had nothing to pack. She walked to the cockpit and sat in the command chair and began the engine startup sequence. The engines groaned and shuddered, and then died with a sound like a giant animal exhaling its last breath. The quantum fold motivators were still not repaired, and without them, the ship could barely hover, let alone break atmosphere and reach fold space. She tried again, and the ship made an even worse sound this time, like metal grinding against metal somewhere deep in its belly. She slammed all 4 of her fists against the console, and felt a sting behind her silver eyes. A sting she had not felt since she was a child. She was trapped. She was trapped on this little planet with a war fleet coming, and the only people who had ever shown her genuine kindness were going to burn for it. Buzzed. It was Marcus. "Hey," he said. "The vibration sensor I installed on your engine just went off. You trying to start the ship?" She had forgotten about that. He had wired a small sensor to his personal communication device, because he said he wanted to monitor the engine cycles remotely. She had thought it was unnecessary at the time. Now she realized that this human had essentially installed a baby monitor on a spacecraft worth more than his entire solar system. "Go back to sleep, Marcus," she said. "I am already in the truck," he said. "Be there in 10 minutes. He found her in the cockpit. She was sitting in the massive command chair, and she was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears running down her silver-blue face and falling onto her hands. She had 4 hands, and all of them were shaking. Marcus had never seen her like this. In the weeks he had known her, she had been calm and composed, and slightly superior in the way that someone is when they know they are smarter than everyone in the room. Seeing her break was like watching a mountain crack. He climbed into the co-pilot's seat, which was absurdly large for him, and his feet dangled above the floor, like a child sitting in an adult chair. He did not say anything right away. He just sat there and let the silence be what it was. Then he said, "Talk to me." And she did. She told him everything, not the careful edited version she had been sharing over dinners and coffee. The real version, the whole truth. Her full name was Calthera Vortian, and she was not just from a powerful family. She was the supreme inheritor of the Vortian Dominion, which was the single most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. Her dominion controlled over 12,000 star systems and commanded a fleet of warships so vast that if you lined them up end to end, they would stretch from Earth to Jupiter. Her personal wealth exceeded the combined economic output of most galactic civilizations. She was, by any measure that existed, the richest and most powerful individual in the entire galaxy. She had been traveling in secret to a diplomatic summit when her cousin, Prince Virak, who wanted the throne for himself, had arranged the sabotage. Her guards had been killed, her ship had been crippled, she had managed to aim for the nearest habitable world before the navigation system failed, and she crashed on a ridge in a place called Dust Hollow, on a planet that her people did not even bother to put on most of their star maps. Marcus absorbed all of this. He sat in the oversized chair with his work boots dangling, and his grease-stained hands resting on his knees, and he listened to every word. When she was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So your cousin is a real piece of work, huh? Please say." Kylthira stared at him. She had just told this man that she was essentially the queen of the galaxy, and his response was to insult her cousin like. They were discussing a bad neighbor. She felt a laugh building in her chest, which was insane given the circumstances, but she could not stop it. It came out as a sound somewhere between a sob and a bark, and it surprised both of them. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was serious again. "He is coming here. Virak is bringing a war fleet to this system. He knows I survived, and he is coming to finish what he started. You need to take Lily, and you need to hide somewhere far away from me." "No," Marcus said. "You do not understand. He will burn this planet if he has to. He does not care about human lives. He does not care about any lives. You are in danger because of me, and I cannot." "No," Marcus said again. He said it the same way he said everything, calm and flat and absolutely immovable, like a boulder that had been sitting in the same spot for 1,000 years and was not planning to move anytime soon. "I crashed your ridge," Kylthira said. "Door." "You crashed on my ridge," Marcus corrected her. "And I have been fixing your ship for 3 weeks. I am not leaving a job half done. Also, if a war fleet is coming to Earth, then hiding does not help anyone, does it?" She wanted to argue, but he was right, and she hated that he was right. "The engines," she said. "The quantum fold motivators are still damaged. Without them, we cannot reach fold space, and without fold space, we cannot outrun a war fleet. The repair requires precision work that my people's best engineers train for decades to perform. It cannot be done with hand tools in a field on a backwater world." Marcus was quiet. He climbed down from the chair and walked to the rear of the cockpit, where a floor panel gave access to the engine systems below. He pulled the panel open and looked down into the machinery, conduits and crystals and components that operated on principles his species had not even discovered yet. Said, "I will figure out the rest." Kylthira spent 4 hours explaining the quantum fold motivator system to him. She used the simplest terms she could, and Marcus listened and asked questions that should have been basic, but kept revealing angles she had not considered. He was not learning the science. He was learning the shape of the problem. Then he went to work. What happened over the next 40 hours would later be described by Kylthira to her people as the single most extraordinary feat of engineering in recorded galactic history. Marcus Cole worked without sleep and almost without rest. He rebuilt a device that manipulated the fabric of space-time itself, using hand tools, salvaged parts, and his own stubborn refusal to accept that something could not be done. He fabricated components from materials he found on the ship, and materials he brought from his shop. He welded, wired, and calibrated by feel rather than by instrument. He invented a new way to make it hold. When a part did not exist, he made one. There were moments when Kylthira watched him and could not understand how his hands knew where to go, because he was working faster than thought, moving on pure instinct. At hour 36, Lily arrived, because Mrs. Patterson had a doctor's appointment and there was no one else. Marcus set her up in the corridor, with blankets and snacks and her drawing supplies, and she fell asleep leaning against Kylthira's side, while Marcus kept working. At hour 40, Marcus climbed out of the engine bay. He was covered in grease and alien coolant, and his eyes were red, and his hands were trembling from exhaustion. He was holding Lily, who had woken up and wanted to be carried. "Run the diagnostic," he said. Calthira activated the engine diagnostic system. Numbers and readings and quantum measurements scrolled across the cockpit displays. She read each one carefully, and then she read them again. Every system was green, every single one. She looked at Marcus, who was standing there swaying slightly, with his sleeping daughter in his arms, and duct tape on his boots, and grease on his face, and she felt something she had never felt in her entire centuries-long existence. It was not gratitude, although there was that too. It was not attraction, although if she was honest with herself, there was some of that as well. It was awe, pure and simple and overwhelming. Awe for this small, fragile, impossible creature who had just done what no being in the galaxy should have been able to do. Marcus said, "I think the calibration on the secondary array might drift a little to the left over time, so you want to check that every few thousand light years." Then the sky outside went dark. Not night dark, something else. Something that blotted out the stars themselves. Calthira's console lit up with warnings and proximity alerts, and she felt her hearts, both of them, drop into her stomach. 300 warships had just entered the Sol system. A broadcast cut through every frequency on the planet. The voice was smooth and cold, and Calthira recognized it instantly. It was Virak. "Surrender the fugitive," the voice said, "or this world burns." Marcus looked at Calthira, then he looked at Lily sleeping in his arms. Then he set his daughter gently down in the co-pilot's chair, and tucked a blanket around her, and kissed her forehead. He picked up his coffee mug from the console where he had left it 40 hours ago, and took a sip. It was ice cold, but he drank it anyway. "Guess we better get moving," he said. The ship lifted off the ridge, with a sound like thunder wrapped in silk. And Marcus was the one flying it, because Calthira was still too weak from her injuries to interface with the Neuralink piloting system, and someone had to do it. Marcus had spent about 10 minutes looking at the cockpit controls 2 weeks ago, and he had figured out most of them by feel and guesswork, and the kind of stubborn confidence that comes from a man who has driven every vehicle that has ever rolled through his shop. He flew the most advanced personal starship in the galaxy, the way he drove his old pickup truck, fast and instinctive, and with a casual disregard for what the instruments said was possible. The ship responded to him like it was alive and grateful for it, like it had been waiting for someone to stop being careful and just let it run. Lily was strapped into a crash seat that was designed for someone 3 times her size. Marcus had stuffed pillows around her, so she would not rattle around. She was wide awake now, and staring out the viewport at the stars that were streaking past like lines of white paint on black canvas. She was not scared, because her father was here, and her father could fix anything. The ship's AI, which had been quietly observing Marcus for 3 weeks, flagged him in its threat assessment database. It classified him as a Class 0 adaptive threat, which was a designation normally reserved for entire species, not individual organisms. Calthira saw the notification on her console and dismissed it, but she did not disagree with the assessment. 300 Vortian warships were arranged in a net around the inner solar system. Virak was thorough if nothing else. His flagship, the Burning Crown, sat at the center of the formation, like a spider in a web. It was a massive vessel, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet in half, and Virak was aboard it, feeling very pleased with himself. He stopped feeling pleased when the sensors showed a single ship rising from the planet's surface and accelerating at a rate that his tactical officers said should not be possible for a vessel that size. Marcus pushed the ship into the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. He wove through the tumbling rocks at a speed that made Calthira's stomach clench, and she had 2 stomachs, so that was saying something. He was not calculating trajectories or consulting navigation data. He was reading the space ahead of him the same way he read an engine, by the movement of the parts and the gaps between them. 3 warships followed him into the belt. 2 of them collided with asteroids within the first minute. The third pulled back. "They are not very good at this, are they?" Marcus said. "Those were trained military pilots," Kael'thera said. "Huh," Marcus said, and he pulled the ship into a hard turn around a rock the size of a football stadium. He used Jupiter's gravity well next, swinging around the gas giant so close that the ship's hull groaned from the tidal forces. The maneuver slingshot them at a velocity that Virak's tactical computers classified as theoretically impossible. 12 more warships tried to match the maneuver. 9 of them lost engine function from the gravitational stress. From the back seat, Lily whispered, "Go faster, Daddy." Marcus grinned. It was the kind of grin that Kael'thera had never seen on his face before. Not the tired, patient smile he wore in the shop, or the gentle one he gave Lily at bedtime. This was something else. Something sharp and bright, and just a little bit dangerous. This was a man who was very good at what he did, and who had finally been given a machine worthy of his hands. While Marcus flew, Kael'thera worked. She opened the ship's now functional comm array and began transmitting on encrypted channels that only Vortian royal frequencies could access. She sent the evidence she had been carrying since the sabotage. Sensor logs showing Virak's agents aboard her ship. Communication intercepts proving he had ordered the hit. Financial records tracing the bribes he had paid to her guard captain. She sent it to the Vortian High Council. She sent it to the Imperial Guard. And most importantly, she sent it to the commanders of the Dominion Grand Fleet, whose loyalty was to the legitimate, supreme inheritor, and not to whatever pretender was currently trying to steal the throne. Then she waited. Virak realized what she was doing about 10 minutes too late. His communications officer intercepted fragments of the transmission, and Virak went from confident to furious in the space of a heartbeat. He ordered his entire fleet to converge on the single ship. All 300 vessels, every weapon hot. Marcus saw the tactical display light up with incoming contacts, and he did something that made no logical sense. He stopped running. He killed the engines and let the ship drift in the shadow of Saturn's rings, and he said, "How long until your people get here?" Kael'thera checked the subspace relay. "If they receive the message, and if the Grand Fleet is within range, then maybe 20 minutes. "That is a lot of ifs," Marcus said. "Yes, it is." Marcus drummed his fingers on the console. Then he said, "When I was fixing the lower deck on day 12, I found something. A system that was powered down and hidden behind a false panel. I thought it was broken, so I fixed it." "What is a harmonic disruption array?" Kael'thera went very still. A harmonic disruption array was an experimental weapon prototype, incredibly powerful and incredibly secret. It had been hidden on her ship without her knowledge, probably by the Military Research Division, who used royal transports to move classified technology between facilities. It was not supposed to exist yet. "You fixed it," she said. "I routed it through the navigational deflector," Marcus said. "The power conduits were compatible, so I figured, why not? Marcus, that weapon can disable an entire fleet if their ships are networked together." "Are Virak's ships networked together?" Kael'thera checked the sensor data. Virak's fleet was operating on a standard Vortian battle link, which meant every ship shared tactical data through a unified network. It was efficient and powerful, and it also meant that a harmonic pulse delivered to one ship would cascade through the network like lightning through water. "Yes," she said, "they are all linked." "Good," Marcus said, and he brought the engines back online. He flew straight at Virak's flagship. 300 warships opened fire on him at once, and Marcus dodged through the barrage like he was walking between raindrops. The ship twisted and rolled, and dove through gaps in the weapons fire that existed for fractions of a second. Every maneuver was impossible, and Marcus made each one look easy. He was not thinking anymore. He was just moving. Ship and the space around him, all flowing together like one continuous motion. The burning crown filled the viewport, and Virak was screaming orders at his crew, because this tiny ship, this impossible little speck, was not stopping, and it was not dying, and it was getting closer with every second. Marcus found the firing control for the harmonic disruption array. It was not labeled, because it was not supposed to be there, but he recognized the power signature from when he had repaired it. He routed full power to the array, and felt the ship hum around him like a tuning fork struck by a god. He fired. One shot, one single pulse of energy that crossed the void between his ship and the burning crowd in less than a heartbeat. It struck the flagship, and the massive vessel did not explode, it simply stopped. Every light went dark, every weapon went cold, every system aboard died, as if someone had reached inside and pulled the heart out of the machine. It jumped through the battle links from ship to ship, spreading like a wave through the entire fleet. Warships went dark one after another, in a chain reaction that swept through Virak's forces like a wind blowing out candles. Within 30 seconds, nearly 100 ships were dead in space, drifting and powerless and silent. The remaining ships broke formation in panic, and that was when the sky tore open. Fold space ruptures bloomed across the void like flowers made of light, and through them came the Dominion Grand Fleet. 2,000 warships, the real Vortian Navy. At their center was the Throne of Worlds, the Dominion flagship, a vessel so large that it bent the light around it and made the stars curve. Virak's remaining forces saw the Grand Fleet, and most of them surrendered immediately. The few who tried to run were disabled within minutes. Virak himself was pulled from the dead bridge of the Burning Crown by Imperial guards who were not gentle about it. It was over in less than an hour. Kelthira stood on the bridge of the Throne of Worlds, surrounded by admirals and council members and guards, who knelt when she entered. She was still wearing the same clothes she had worn in Marcus's workshop. She still had grease on her arm, from where she had leaned against a bulkhead he had been repairing. She looked like a mechanic who had wandered into a palace, and the admirals did not know what to make of it. She addressed the Dominion formally. She named Virax's crimes. She reclaimed her title and her authority. The galaxy watched through broadcast relays as the supreme inheritor of the Vortian Dominion took back what was hers. But before any of the ceremonies could begin, she looked at the main view screen where a small blue planet hung in the darkness. A tiny world of water and stone and 7 billion people who had no idea how close they had come to burning. Place Earth under full Dominion protection, she said. Highest classification, no exceptions. An admiral asked why. Kelthira looked at him and said, "Because a man there fixed my ship and made me chilly, and his daughter braided my hair." The Vortian High Council had absolutely no idea what to do with this information. Every news network, on every inhabited world, in every corner of known space ran the story over and over again. A single human, a mechanic from a planet so insignificant that most star maps did not even bother to label it. He had repaired a Vortian royal starship using hand tools and scrap metal. He had flown it through a war fleet of 300 vessels and survived. He had fired an experimental weapon that he had accidentally discovered and repaired and routed through the wrong system in exactly the right way, and he had disabled a flagship with one shot. The experts could not explain it. Vortian engineers examined the repairs Marcus had made to Kelthira's ship, and they released a formal statement saying that what he had done was, quote, technically impossible, end quote. The quantum fold motivator he had rebuilt should not have functioned. The hull alloy he had invented should not have existed. The weapon routing he had improvised should have blown the ship apart instead of firing a clean pulse. But it had worked. All of it. Every single impossible thing had worked. Intelligence agencies across the galaxy began quietly reassessing their files on humanity. Earth had been classified for decades as a pre-contact minor species of no strategic significance. That classification was being revised, urgently, because if one human mechanic with no training and no resources could do what Marcus Cole had done, then what could the entire species do if someone gave them proper tools? The answer frightened quite a few people in quite a few governments. Marcus did not care about any of this. He was back in Dust Hollow 3 days after the battle. He had politely refused an escort of Vortian warships and flown home in his repaired truck, which Kael'thera had arranged to be transported back to Earth, because she understood that the truck mattered to him. He picked Lily up from Mrs. Patterson's house and took her for ice cream, and she told him about everything she had missed at school, and he listened to every word like it was the most important briefing in the universe. Kael'thera came to see him before her formal coronation ceremony. She arrived in a diplomatic shuttle that landed in the field behind his shop, and she walked through his door in full ceremonial armor that gleamed with light from metals that did not exist on Earth. She had to duck to get through the doorway, and even then her crest of tendrils brushed the ceiling. She sat down across from him at his workbench, and she told him that she wanted to give him everything. She meant it literally. She offered him wealth that would have made him the richest human being who had ever lived. She offered him a palace on any world in the Dominion. She offered him a title and a seat on the High Council. She offered him a personal fleet of ships. She offered Lily the finest education available in 12,000 star systems, with tutors and facilities that would make every university on Earth look like a kindergarten. Marcus listened to all of it. He was sitting on his shop stool with a cup of coffee in his hand and a half-disassembled transmission on the bench beside him. He let her finish, and then he was quiet for a moment. "That is really generous," he said, "but I have got a shop to run, and Lily has school on Monday." Kael'thera stared at him. She had just offered this man more than most civilizations possessed, and he had turned it down because his daughter had school on Monday. She wanted to argue with him, but she also wanted to laugh, and she also wanted to cry, and she was not sure which impulse to follow, so she just sat there and looked at him. "You saved my life," she said. "You crashed on my ridge," he said. "Anyone would have helped." "No," she said, and her voice was firm. "They would not have. I have lived for a very long time, Marcus, and I have ruled over trillions of beings, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you did is not normal. It is not common. Most people in this galaxy would have walked away from that crash site. The ones who did not walk away would have tried to profit from it. You just helped because someone needed help, and that was enough for you." Marcus shrugged. He was uncomfortable with praise. He always had been. Kael'thera visited Earth one more time before she had to return to her duties. She came on a quiet evening when the sun was going down, and the sky over Dust Hollow was turning orange and pink. She did not come in armor this time. She wore simple traveling clothes, and she brought a gift for Lily. And she sat in Marcus's small kitchen in a chair that creaked dangerously under her weight, and she drank coffee from a mug that looked like a thimble in her 4 hands. They talked, not about empires or politics, or the future of human-alien relations. They talked about Lily's newest drawings, which had become increasingly elaborate since her adventure in space. They talked about the weird rattling noise Marcus's truck was making that he could not quite locate. They talked about chili, and whether it was better with beans or without beans, and Kael'thera was firmly and passionately on the side of without beans. And Marcus told her she was wrong, and she told him that she controlled 12,000 star systems, and he told her that did not make her right about beans. It was the most normal evening of her entire life, and it was the happiest she had ever been. Then she got quiet, and she looked at her hands wrapped around the tiny mug, and she said something she had never said to anyone. She said that in her whole life, surrounded by trillions of subjects and the most advanced civilization ever built, and wealth and power beyond anything most beings could imagine, no one had ever simply been kind to her without wanting something in return. Every interaction she had ever had came with conditions and expectations. Hidden agendas. Every smile directed at her was calculated. Every word spoken to her was weighed for political advantage. Until a mechanic on a backwater planet handed her a thermos of coffee, and said, "Let us see what we are working with." Marcus looked at her and said, "That is a terrible way to live." She agreed. Before she left, she did 3 things. First, she established a permanent Vortian embassy on Earth. This single act transformed humanity overnight from a galactic nobody to a protected species under the umbrella of the most powerful civilization in known space. No one would threaten Earth again, not while the Vortian flag flew above its soil. Second, she created a technology exchange program designed to help humanity advance at its own pace, without being overwhelmed. She appointed Marcus as the technical liaison overseeing the program, which was a title he found absolutely hilarious, and which Lily thought meant her dad was basically a space ambassador. Third, she gave Lily a personal communication link to the Throne of Worlds, a direct line to the most powerful being in the galaxy. Lily used it almost exclusively to show Calthera her drawings, and to ask when she was coming back for dinner. Months passed. Marcus went back to his life. He fixed trucks and tractors and the occasional piece of alien technology that came through the new embassy. Lily went to school and drew pictures and told her classmates stories about her dad's tall friend that nobody believed. Dust Hollow stayed small and quiet and ordinary in all the ways that mattered. Then one afternoon, Marcus was under the hood of an old Ford, working on a stubborn transmission, when a shadow fell across the open bay door of his shop. It was a big shadow, much bigger than any human would cast. He looked up. Calthera was standing in his doorway. She was not in armor. She was not surrounded by guards. She was wearing simple clothes, and her tendrils were glowing softly in the afternoon light, and she looked almost nervous, which was an expression Marcus had never seen on the face of someone who commanded the largest military force in the galaxy. She said she had a diplomatic summit in 3 days, but she was passing through the sector, and she wondered if Marcus needed any help in the shop. She also said she had brought Lily a gift. She also said she was wondering if that offer of chili was still open. She said all of this very quickly, like she had rehearsed it on the flight over, and was afraid she would forget the words if she slowed down. Marcus knew that Earth was not on the way to anything. It was on the outer arm of an unremarkable galaxy in a region of space that no trade route or diplomatic corridor had any reason to pass through. Passing through the sector was a 4,000 light-year detour at minimum. He did not mention this. Instead, he smiled. It was a real smile, a full smile, had not given anyone since Elena died. It changed his whole face and made him look younger and lighter, like someone had taken a weight off his shoulders that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. "Grab a wrench," he said. "You can start with the transmission on the Ford." Calthera, supreme inheritor of the Vortian Dominion, ruler of 12,000 star systems, commander of the greatest fleet ever assembled, and the wealthiest and most powerful individual in the known galaxy, picked up a wrench from the workbench. She ducked under the hood of a beat-up Ford truck in a tiny shop in a small town on an unremarkable planet. And for the first time in her very long and very powerful and very lonely life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The following week, Lily's teacher asked the class to share what they did over the weekend. Lily stood up in front of her classmates and said, "My dad's friend came over for dinner. Really tall. She liked the chili, and that was all anyone needed to know."